What is writing? Telepathy, of course. My name is Stephen King. I'm writing the first draft of this part on my desk on a snowy morning in December of 1997. There are things on my mind. Some are worries, some are good things. But right now, all that stuff is up top. I'm in another place. This book is scheduled to be published in the late summer or early fall of 2000. If that's how things work out, then you are somewhere downstream on the timeline from me. But you're quite likely in your own far-seeing place, the one where you go to receive telepathic messages. Not that you have to be there. Books are a uniquely portable magic. I usually listen to one in the car and carry another wherever I go. You just never know when you'll want an escape hatch. A mile-long line at a toll booth plaza, the 15 minutes you have to spend in the hall of some boring college building waiting for your advisor, airport boarding lounges, laundry mats on a rainy afternoon, and the absolute worst, which is the doctor's office when the guy's running late and you have to wait a half hour in order to have something sensitive mauled. At such times, I find a book vital. If I have to spend time in purgatory before going to one place or another, I guess I'll be all right as long as there's a lending library. So I read where I can, but I have a favorite place, and you probably do too. So let's assume that you're in your favorite receiving place, just as I am in the place where I do my best transmitting. We'll have to perform our mentalist routine not just over distance, but over time as well. Yet that presents no real problem. If we can still read Dickens, Shakespeare, and Herodotus, I think we can manage the gap between 1997 and 2000. And here we go. Actual telepathy in action. You'll notice I have nothing on my sleeves, and that my lips never move. Neither most likely to yours. We're not even in the same year together, let alone the same room. Except we are together. We're close. We're having a meeting of the minds. That is an excerpt from the book that I'm going to talk to you about today, and the one I had a hard time putting down, which is Stephen King on Writing, a Memoir of the Craft. And I wanted to start there because I thought Stephen King was making a similar point to what I think might be my favorite all-time quote about books, and that comes from Carl Sagan. Let me read it to you real quick. What an astonishing thing a book is. It's a flat object made from a tree with flexible parts on which are imprinted lots of funny dark squiggles. But one glance at it, and you're inside the mind of another person. Maybe somebody dead for thousands of years. Across the millennia, an author is speaking clearly and silently inside your head directly to you. Writing is perhaps the greatest of human inventions, binding together people who never knew each other, citizens of distant epochs. Books break the shackles of time. A book is proof that humans are capable of working magic. And before I jump back into the book, I want to start with two other quotes. This comes from the back of the book, and it gives you a description of why this book is so unique. And it says, immensely helpful and illuminating to any aspiring writer. I think it applies to entrepreneurs, investors, anybody trying to do something creative or difficult, actually. This special edition of Stephen King's critically lauded million-copy bestseller shares the experiences, habits, and convictions that have shaped him and his work. Part memoir, part masterclass by one of the best-selling authors of all time, this superb volume is a revealing and practical view of the writer's craft, comprising the basic tools of the trade every writer must have. And I have one more quote for you. It actually came from a listener when he found out that I was reading this book. He said there's a paragraph in that book that's my favorite quote of all time. And so I'm going to read it to you. He says, and this is Stephen writing, when asked, how do you write, I invariably answer, one word at a time, and the answer is invariably dismissed. But that is all it is. It sounds too simple to be true. But consider the Great Wall of China, if you will. One stone at a time, man. That's all. One stone at a time. But I've read you can see that motherfucker from space without a telescope. And so Stephen's going to come back to that idea throughout the book. One word at a time, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, over and over again. He talks about the process that allowed him and the schedule that allowed him to write over 60 books. He has sold over 350 million books, which is one of the reasons I wanted to read this book. And I'm going to start with one of the last things he ever says in the book. I have the updated 20th anniversary edition. So there's in the very back at the end is this interview with him and his son. And I just want to pull out this one part before I go into his early life, because this is just, it's really important to remember. This is said by something. He said this in 2019 after he has sold 350 million books. And what he's describing is a variation of the entrepreneurial emotional roller coaster that we see over and over again, that anybody that's building anything, anybody that's doing something difficult experiences themselves and shows up in every single one of these biographies. And he says the most important thing is to push through, to not become depressed. I try to remember that we're all amateurs at this. And every time I sit down, it's like the first time. I battle doubts all the time about whether or not this thing is working or that thing is working and whether or not the idea is any good. And so that idea where he's talking about every time I sit down, it's like the very first time I've ever wrote anything. I have to constantly battle doubts. I have to make sure I'm going forward. I'm not being depressed. I'm glad I read that paragraph after I just finished that gigantic 500-page biography by Steven Spielberg, because what was so mind-blowing to me is the fact that even now, after all, he's one of the most successful filmmakers of all time. Stephen King is one of the most successful writers of all time. They said the same thing. He's like, I have to battle doubts. Steven Spielberg literally throws up. He's so full of anxiety and worry before he starts a new movie that he vomits. Think about that. The next time you have these periods of self-doubt, am I on the right track? Is this idea any good? Should I be doing this? And when it does happen, you'll remember that Stephen King and Steven Spielberg and countless other people before you have gone through this exact same thing. I'm going to start his early childhood. This guy's writing. I have to admit something. I've never read a Stephen King book. My sister's bought me, I have 2 or 3 of his books in my house. I have not got around to reading them yet. But it's no surprise, if somebody was able to sell 350 million books, he's obviously going to be a good writer. And I was amazed at how efficient he is and how he can tell entire paragraphs, or entire stories in just paragraphs. I'm going to start out with his disjointed childhood and his broken family. He gets you emotionally invested in the unbelievable struggle that he has to go through before he sells his first book. So he says, I lived an odd, herky-jerky childhood, raised by a single parent who moved around a lot in my earliest years, and who, I'm not completely sure of this, may have farmed my brother and me out to one of her sisters for a while because she was economically or emotionally unable to cope with us for a time. Perhaps she was only chasing our father, who piled up all sorts of bills and then did a run-out when I was 2 and my brother David was 4. If so, she never succeeded in finding him. And then on the next page, one sentence that tells an entire story. My earliest memory is of imagining I was someone else. That reminded me of a line in the Steven Spielberg book, which says he did not like the world, so he made his own. Then he gets into a little bit why he's writing the book. This is very similar to why founders exist. What he's going to say about writing, you and I believe about entrepreneurship, right? I believe large numbers of people have at least some talent as writers and storytellers, and that those talents can be strengthened and sharpened. If I didn't believe that, writing a book like this would be a waste of time. So they move around a lot. His mom never has really a stable job. They really don't have a lot of money. He's also sick. At this point, he's about 6 years old. He's got a lot of inner ear infections and throat problems. And so he's going to actually be held back 1 year. But the point of this short story he's about to tell us, the main point here is that imitation precedes creation. So he says, I was pulled out of school entirely. I had missed too much of the first grade. My mother and the school agreed I could start fresh in the fall the next year if my health was good. So what he spent his time, he said, I spent time in bed, mainly in the house. I read my way through approximately 6 tons of comic books. At some point, I began to write my own stories. Imitation preceded creation. I would copy Combat Casey comics word for word, sometimes adding my own descriptions where they seemed appropriate. Eventually, I showed one of these copycat hybrids to my mother, and she was charmed. I remember her slightly amazed smile, as if she was unable to believe a kid of hers could be so smart. Practically a damn prodigy, for God's sake. I had never seen that look on her face before, not on my account anyway, and I absolutely loved it. She asked me if I had made the story up myself, and I was forced to admit that I had copied most of it. She seemed disappointed. Write one of your own. I bet you could do better. And listen to the reaction that he has here. Something that, he's 6 years old, he keeps with his entire life, even to this day. I remember an immense feeling of possibility at the idea, as if I had been ushered into a vast building filled with closed doors and had been given leave to open any I liked. There were more doors than one person could ever open in a lifetime, I thought. And I still think that. And so this is another example where he has the ability to communicate with no fat whatsoever. This is what I'm about to read you takes place over 3 paragraphs. He tells an entire story. You understand exactly what's going on in his life at this point. The one thing I need to tell you before I read it to you is that his mom's name is Ruth. Don't worry about the other names. Our little family, Trioca, had moved back to Maine so our mom could take care of her parents in their declining years. Grandma was about 80 at the time, obese and hypertensive and mostly blind. Daddy Guy was 82, scrawny, morose, and prone to the occasional Donald Duck outburst, which only my mother could understand. My mother's sisters had gotten my mom this job, perhaps thinking they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The aged parents would be taken care of in a homey environment by a loving daughter, and the nagging problem of Ruth would be solved. She would no longer be adrift, trying to take care of 2 boys while she floated almost aimlessly from Indiana to Wisconsin to Connecticut. She hated her new job, I think. In their effort to take care of her, her sisters turned our self-sufficient, funny, slightly nutty mother into a sharecropper living a largely cashless existence. The money the sisters sent her each month covered the groceries but little else. They sent boxes of clothes for us. Towards the end of each summer, Uncle Clay and Aunt Ella, who were not, I think, real relatives at all, would bring cartons of canned vegetables and preserves. The house we lived in belonged to Aunt Ethel and Uncle Orrin. And once she was there, Mom was caught. She got another actual job after the old folks died, but she lived in that house until the cancer got her. When she left the little town for the last time, my brother David, and his wife Linda cared for her during the final weeks of her illness. I have an idea she was probably more than ready to go. And so Stephen weaves all these little stories, these anecdotes about his childhood and his early life into his thoughts on writing as well. And so this is what he says, where ideas come from, and what our job is. Okay, so he says, let's get one thing clear right now, shall we? There is no idea dump, no story central, no island of the buried bestsellers. Good story ideas seem to come quite literally from nowhere, sailing at you right out of the empty sky. 2 previously unrelated ideas come together and make something new under the sun. Your job isn't to find these ideas, but to recognize them when they show up. So I want to go back to one sentence in that paragraph. He says 2 previously unrelated ideas come together and make something new under the sun. One of my favorite quotes of Albert Einstein, because he believed in that same idea. He says, listen, a new idea is nothing but the outcome of an earlier intellectual experience. A new idea is nothing but the outcome of an earlier intellectual experience. I love that. Okay, so now we're going to get into, he loves to write from an early age. He goes from copying, comic books and little short stories to writing some of his own. He's somewhere in his early teenage years at this point in the story, and he sends off, he writes a bunch of stories and then sends them off and tries to sell them to magazines that he likes. And one magazine he loved was Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, and this is again where we're going to see the combination of, there's a lot of overlap, and maybe it's just because of that book, I just finished it, the book's on my mind, but between Steven Spielberg and Stephen King. Stephen King is also obsessed with movies as well, but the reason I bring that up is because Alfred Hitchcock was one of the main influences on Steven Spielberg, and Stephen King had also, Hitchcock also served as an influence for Stephen King. And so the note I left myself in this section is another rejection letter? ? Cool. I'll keep writing. When I got the rejection slip from AHMM, that's Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, I pounded a nail into the wall, wrote happy stamps, which is the name of the story, on the rejection slip, and poked it on the nail. I felt pretty good, actually. When you're still too young to shave, optimism is a perfectly legitimate response to failure. By the time I was 14, the nail in my wall would no longer support the weight of the rejection slips impaled upon it. I replaced the nail with a spike and went on writing. So some of his main influences at the very beginning, there was magazines, there was their version of, newsletters, comic books, but also movies. So he winds up going to see, he would spend a lot of time, just like David Geffen, just like Steven Spielberg, he'd spend all day seeing these double and triple features, right? And so he's coming back one time late at night, maybe is what I'm trying to say there. And he has this idea. He's like, well, what the movie I just saw was great. Why don't I write? And it's kind of, it just hit me now that I'm trying to talk to you about this. But it's funny because now a lot of his books go from books to movies. In this case, he's going from movie to book. So this is a story about selling his first book and then realizing there's always going to be naysayers. So he's like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to write my own version of the movie I just saw. And what's pretty crazy is he's 15 at the time, somewhere around there. And he's he doesn't have a car, they have no money, so he hitchhikes everywhere back and forth late at night as this young, I guess you could say young kid, young man, or whatever the case is. So he says, on a long hitch home that night, I had a wonderful idea. I would turn The Pit and the Pendulum, the movie he just seen, into a book. I wouldn't just write this masterpiece. I could also print it using the drum press in our basement and sell copies at school. As it was conceived, so was it done. And he has access to printing equipment because his older brother, they kind of like put it together in like a rough slipshod kind of manner because he would produce like a family newsletter and like a newspaper actually. And so he's just using his older brother's printing equipment. So he says, The Pit and Pendulum turned out to be my first bestseller. I took the entire print run to school in my book bag. By the end of lunch hour, I had sold 3 dozen and was walking around in a kind of a dream. It all seemed too good to be true. It was. When the school day ended at 2 o'clock, I was summoned to the principal's office where I was told I couldn't turn the school into a marketplace. And so this is what the principal told him. What I don't understand, Stevie, she said, is why you write junk like this in the first place. You're talented. Why do you waste your abilities? And then this is a fantastic paragraph. And this is going to echo this thing you and I have talked about over and over again. Just this, that sometimes critics are right, sometimes they're wrong. Doesn't matter. They're constant. That is his point that he's saying here. To her credit, the question was not entirely rhetorical, but I had no answer to give. I was ashamed. I have spent a good many years since, too many, I think, being ashamed about what I write. How crazy is that statement? Think about that. 350 million copies sold, and I'm still spending 4 decades, sometimes being ashamed by what I write. There's that creepy self-doubt, right? I think I was 40 before I realized that almost every writer who has ever published a line has been accused by someone of wasting his or her God-given talent. That's another important sentence there. If you write or paint or dance or sculpt or sing, someone will try to make you feel lousy about it. That's all. I'm not editorializing. I'm just trying to give you the facts as I see them. So while he's still in high school, he gets the opportunity to get a job writing about sports at the local newspaper, even though he doesn't know anything about sports, but it actually teaches him a lot of writing. So what's so fascinating about this, what's happening to him, is we've seen this happen in a few other occasions. So he winds up learning more at the newspaper about writing than he does at school. Ernest Hemingway was very similar. He credited his time, I think he was in St. Louis. I forgot where he was, where he was just giving like basic like wire like news reports, right? Like no really opinion, just here. This is the facts. This is the stuff that happened. And he talked about later on that's where he learned to write short sentences and learned to have like really clear writing. And if you ever read Hemingway, especially The Old Man and the Sea, like there's just no fat on any of his sentences. And so the same thing's about to happen to Stephen King here. And then I want to read 2 other things to you because Dr. Seuss, when I read his biography, Frank Capra, this is interesting how it all ties together. So Frank Capra was this famous director, writer, producer. The guy that wrote Steven Spielberg's biography that I read last week actually wrote a biography on Frank Capra, right? And so Frank Capra is like a decade or 2 older than Dr. Seuss, Ted at the time, Ted Geisel, whatever his name was. And he actually he's the one that taught Dr. Seuss how to write concisely. So I'm going to tie all this together in a minute. So let me first start with what's happening with Stephen King. And then I want to also bring up how this reminds me of one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard. And it's about that there's no speed limit. So let me see if I can tie this all together and hopefully it makes sense to you. Okay. So it says, he's this guy, his name's Gold. He's actually proofreading this story, right, that a young Stephen King has written. So he says, then he started in on the feature piece with a large black pen. I took my fair share of English lit classes and my fair share of composition, fiction, and poetry classes in college. But John Gould taught me more than any of them, and in no more than 10 minutes. Remember that 10-minute part for the story. I'm going to talk about no speed limit, okay? So he taught me more than all these classes, and he taught it to me in 10 minutes. When he finished marking my copy in the manner indicated above, he looked up, and there's pictures of the actual, like, what he did to this. If you want to see it, obviously read the book. It's fantastic. When he finished marking my copy in the manner indicated above, he looked up and saw something on my face. I think he must have mistaken it for horror. It wasn't. It was pure revelation. Why, I wonder, didn't English teachers ever do this? And he's just essentially crossing out the stuff that is unnecessary, that's not advancing the story. And so he said, I only took out the bad parts, Gould said. Most of it's pretty good. I know, I said, meaning both things. And then Stephen King says, I won't do it again. He laughed. If that's true, you'll never have to work for a living. You can do this instead, meaning write. Do I have to explain any of these marks? No, I said. Now we go back to the advice that he gets that taught him more than in 10 minutes than anybody else than all the classes he took, right? When you write a story, you're telling yourself the story, he said. When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. So let me read that to you again. When you write a story, you're telling yourself the story, he said. When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. And let me pause here because while I'm reading this too, another thought just popped in my mind. It might be, I don't know if I've been clear or not, but like, why is this so important, especially for entrepreneurs, investors, creative people who are doing anything difficult? Because the power of learning, the storyteller is the most powerful person in the world, right? That's a quote from Steve Jobs. It's actually one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs. And it's not only did he apply that, the quote I'm about to read to you comes from when he was at Pixar. This is actually before he went back to Apple the second time, but it's also what he did at Apple. When you hear his speeches and how he talks about marketing is about values, how you communicate, why you're doing what you're doing. People don't buy what you're doing, they buy why you're doing, right? So he says, this is now Jobs speaking. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda for an entire generation that is to come. The founder is the chief storyteller in a business. Jobs knew that down to his core. So let's go back to this. When you rewrite, your main job is to taking out all the things that are not the story. Gould said something else that was interesting. On the day I turned in my first two pieces, write with the door closed. Now, this is fascinating because now I'm rereading this, right? I'm only in the first quarter of the book still. But he talks about this. Stephen King is going to take this idea that he's learning when he's probably 17, and he's talking about it for the rest of the book. He repeats this over and over again. So he says, write with the door closed. Rewrite with the door open. These are metaphors, okay? I mean, he means that literally and figuratively, I guess is a better way to put that. Your stuff starts out being just for you, in other words, but then it goes out. Once you know what the story is and you get it right as you can anyway, it belongs to anyone who wants to read it or criticize it. If you're very lucky, more people will want to read it than criticize it. Okay, so before I share one of my favorite stories, a story I've told on the podcast several times, it's something I read over and over again to remind myself there's no speed limit. It's very important to know that because we just saw him, a lesson that he carried with him for decades. He learned in 10 minutes. Let's go to Becoming Dr. Seuss. I don't remember what podcast this is. You can find it in the archive, though. But I'm just going to read this to you. It says, Seuss was in awe of Capra's ability to distill a script down to its essence. This is one of my favorite things I've ever read about writing. And just the idea of being able to communicate with other people, right? Communicate with customers, communicate inside your company, communicate with your family. It's just essential to being able to work well with others. He would bring Capra his first draft of a script, then watch with near reverence as Capra slowly went through it with a pencil. Now this is what Capra says. The first thing you have to do in writing is find out if you're saying anything. Capra would carefully go through Dr. Seuss's script, this is before he's Dr. Seuss, underlining the places where he had advanced the story. The rest he left unlined. So I'm looking at your copy, right? We're looking at your writing. I'm only underlining where you advanced the story, okay? Which means that's the part we're going to keep. This is this. The rest he left unlined, remember Dr. Seuss. Most of his first drafts would be returned to him with little or no underlining. And so this is what Dr. Seuss took away from that. Capra taught me conciseness. I learned a lot about the juxtaposition of words and visual images. The tight storytelling discipline instilled by Capra would be formative in shaping Dr. Seuss's future art. And that idea of the tight storytelling discipline, that's really what I feel about why I had a hard time putting this book down. I neglected all my other responsibilities until I finished reading this because how tight Stephen King, he tells entire stories in a paragraph or two. So did Frank Capra, so did John Gould, and so did Dr. Seuss. Okay, so now I'm going to share the story that I love. It's from Derek Sivers, sivers.org is the website, but if you Google Derek Sivers, there's no speed limit, this will pop up. This was written over 10 years ago, and I still think about it all the time. And again, it's called There's No Speed Limit, and it's how he learns an entire semester, or entire semester or two, of music class in just a few lessons with a gifted teacher. So he says, I was 17 and about to start my first year at Berklee College of Music. I called a local recording studio with a random question about music typesetting. When the studio owner heard I was going to Berklee, he said, I graduated from Berklee and taught there too. I bet you I can teach you 2 years of theory and arranging in only a few lessons. I suspect you can graduate in 2 years if you understand there's no speed limit. Come by my studio at 9 a.m. tomorrow for your first lesson if you're interested. No charge. And so another idea just popped out that you and I have been talking about. The idea that it's, for whatever reason, like we think of the Chuck Silvers from last week's podcast, this older guy, generation older than Steven Spielberg, took an interest in Steven when he was 20 years old and literally changed his life by teaching Steven everything he knew, trying to support him. A lot of these entrepreneurs that we read autobiographies of, they do the same thing. Towards the end of their life, inevitably, they're like, listen, I learned a lot over my multiple decade career. I'm going to write it down. This is for future entrepreneurs, for the benefit of future entrepreneurs. That is said so explicitly in the founder of IKEA's autobiography, Ingvar Kamprad. I didn't want to write this autobiography, but I love entrepreneurs and I'm going to help the future generations and they can use my ideas long after I'm gone. That is literally in his book, right? And so we see the same thing here. We have this older guy. His name is Kimo Williams. About to introduce you to him. Hey, you love music. I love music. Let me try to help you as well. If we are in a position to do that for younger people, to help them, we should do so, man. We can literally change their lives. So he says, graduate college in 2 years? Awesome. I liked his style. That was Kimo Williams. I showed up at his studio at 8:40 the next morning. Remember, he said be there at 9, right? Derek? No, that's not good enough. This is some Charlie Munger stuff right here. I showed up at his studio at 8:40 in the morning, super excited, though I waited outside before ringing his bell at 8:59. He opened the door. We're about to get the second lesson that pops up over and over again that's going to differentiate you and I as well. I showed up, I read that part. He opened the door. A tall man in a Hawaiian shirt with a big hat with a square scar on his nose, a laid-back demeanor, and a huge smile, sizing me up and nodding. Recently, I had heard him tell the story from his perspective. He said, my doorbell rang at 8:59 one morning, and I had no idea why. And this is the second part. I run across kids all the time who say they want to be a great musician. I tell them I can help, and I tell them to show up at my studio at 9 a.m. if they're serious. Nobody ever does. It's how I weed out the really serious ones from the kids who just talk. But there was Derek ready to go. Everybody, the vast majority of people, the reason this is called the Misfit Feed is because most people just talk. Most people quit. Most people don't do anything remarkable. They waste their one shot at life. What did Steve Jobs tell us? Half of what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the unsuccessful ones is just pure perseverance, just not giving up. That is half. Listen to what this guy is saying. I'm giving you free lessons. You can knock off 2 years of your college education if you just show up and you don't even show up. Let's go back to this. After a 1 minute welcome, we're sitting at the piano, analyzing the sheet music for a jazz standard. Don't worry about too much of this. You'll understand his main point very quickly because Derek is a fantastic writer. He was quickly explaining the chords based on the diatonic scale. I have no idea what that is. How the dissonance of the tritone and the 5 chord with the flat 7 is what makes it want to resolve to the 1. I have no idea what any of this is. Within a minute, he started quizzing me. If the 5 chord with the flat 7 has that tritone, then so does another flat 7 chord. Which one? The flat 2 chord? Right. So that's a substitute chord. Any flat 7 chord can be substituted with another flat 7 that shares the same tritone. So reharmonize all the chords you can in this chart. Go. And this next sentence is bolded by Derek. The pace was intense and I loved it. Remember that because Stephen King talks a lot of shit too. Where he is not, he's like, listen, if you're not willing to work hard, forget it. Don't just put the book down. You're going to fail. This idea, just like he said at the very opening, he's like, how'd you write so book? How did you write so many books? One word at a time. Most people give up at everything. We are not like most people. Finally, someone was challenging me, keeping me in over my head, encouraging and expecting me to pull myself up quickly. I feel the same thing when you read Stephen King's book. He holds you at a very high standard. You're going to go at this every day, and you're not going to give up, is what Stephen King's going to tell us. I was learning so fast. I felt, and Spielberg said the same thing last week. I was learning so fast, I felt like an adrenaline rush which you get when you're playing a video game. He tossed every fact at me, and it made me prove that I got it. In one 3-hour lesson that morning, he taught me a full semester of Berklee's harmony courses. In our next 4 lessons, remember, Derek shows up and he doesn't quit, right? This guy winds up selling a CD Baby, the company, for $25 or $30 million, something like that, a few decades into the future. In our next 4 lessons, he taught me the next 4 semesters of harmony and arranging classes. When I got to college and took my entrance exams, I tested out of those 6 semesters. Then, as Chemo suggested, I bought the course materials for other required classes and taught myself, doing the homework in my own time. Then I went to the department head and took the final exam, getting full credit for those courses. If there's a paragraph come on, you read that paragraph about somebody, that's not an entrepreneur right there to you? That is the definition of entrepreneurship. He's just applying it to school. This is amazing. By doing this, in addition to completing my full course load, I graduated college in 2.5 years. I got my bachelor's degree when I was 20. Chemo's high expectations set a new pace for me. Let me repeat that to you and tell me that's not exactly what Steve Jobs has told us, right? Chemo's high expectations set a new pace for me. Go back to Steve Jobs. His advice to entrepreneurs: be a yardstick of quality. Some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected. Right? It's the same idea. Chemo's high expectations set a new pace for me. He taught me that this is one of my favorite. I repeat this so many times to friends, to conversations with friends. And I got it from this article or this post. He taught me that the standard pace is for chumps. That the system is designed so anyone can keep up. If you're more driven than most people, you can do way more than anyone expects. And this principle applies to all of life, not just school. Before I met Chemo, I was just a kid who wanted to be a musician, doing it casually. Ever since our 5 lessons, I've had no speed limit. I owe every great thing that's happened in my life to Chemo's raised expectations. A random meeting and 5 music lessons showed me that I can do way more than the norm. Chemo knows how much he means to me. We're friends to this day. Absolutely fantastic. I love rereading that. Again, Derek Sivers. Just Google Derek Sivers. There's no speed limit. If you really want to read it, you'll find it. Don't worry about it. Okay, so let's go to his high school schedule. This is his senior year. His schedule is insane. Insane. And he has to do this because, remember, his mom, single mom, not making a lot of money. So he says, I got a job at the Warmbow Mills in Weaving. I didn't want it. The work was hard and boring. The mill itself was a dingy fuckhole overhanging a polluted river. But I needed the paycheck. My mother was making lousy wages as a housekeeper at a facility for the mentally ill. So let's go into his schedule. During my final weeks of high school, my schedule looked like this. I woke up at 7. I was off to school by 7:30. The last bell was at 2 o'clock. I would punch in at 2:58 at the mill, bag loose fabric for 8 hours, punch out at 11 o'clock at night, get home around 11:45, eat a bowl of cereal, fall into bed, get up the next morning, and do it all again. And there's no really just like there's no really wasted words in his writing, there's no really wasted experiences. Because this whole time he's struggling, he's still writing as much as he can. Like 2 or 3 years later, he remembers there's a story that happens when he's working at the mill where they have to like clean out the basement, and they find rats like the size of dogs and cats and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, okay, well, he wanted this. He wasn't the one cleaning the basement. Somebody told him the story, and so he used that idea a few years later, and he wrote a story about it. And this is where he gets his first big sale. So you'll always remember your first big sale. So this is my final semester at college. I recalled Guy's story about the rats under the mill, big as cats, some as big as dogs, and started writing a story called Graveyard Shift. 2 months later, Cavalier magazine bought the story for $200. I had sold other stories previously to this, but they had bought in a total of just $65 altogether. This was 3 times that, and in a single stroke. It took my breath away. It did. I was rich. So he's got this idea. First, that when he's writing, he talks about the ideal reader, IR. And he's saying, like, if you're creating something, you should create for one person in mind. He writes for his wife in mind. That's his ideal reader. I would say I would compare this a lot with, like, if you're creating a product. Like, if Steven Spielberg said, I'm the audience, Steve Jobs and his team made the iPod for themselves. Like, so you might be your ideal, the person to use your product or service. He just happens to use that for his craft, which is writing. But listen to how he tells the story of getting and staying married. And again, he does this really, really rapidly. He meets his wife in college. They're still married to this day. One day in late June of that summer, a bunch of us library guys had lunch on the grass behind the university bookstore. Sitting between Paulo Silva and Eddie Marsh was a trim girl with a raucous laugh, red-tinted hair, and the prettiest legs I've ever seen. I hadn't run across her in the library, and I didn't believe a college student could utter such a wonderful, unafraid laugh. Her name was Tabitha Spruce. We got married a year and a half later. We're still married. It worked. Our marriage has outlasted all of the world's leaders except for Castro. And if we keep talking, arguing, making love, and dancing to the Ramones, it'll probably keep working. And so I want to pull out one paragraph here. He's talking about this poem that his wife wrote. And this is going to be a weird thought that spawned in my mind, but come with me here, okay? And really, this is what Stephen King believes. Like, he's a professional, right? It's not, I'm not just going to sit around waiting for this inspiration. He's like, no, I'm going to show up every day. And if I show up every day and I put in the work, the inspiration comes, right? You don't just sit there and then, like, strike of lightning and then I have to go write. It's like, no, you show up every day and you do it. And so it says, there was also a work ethic in that poem that I liked, something that suggested that writing poems or stories or essays, or I would add anything else, had as much in common with sweeping the floor as with mythy moments of revelation. And so what this reminded me of was actually there's an interview, or like a clip from an interview I saw one time with the musician, the artist Akon, talking about what it's like, what he learned from working with Eminem, and how once he observed Eminem's process, it changed his approach to his own work forever. And what he said is that he didn't know that Eminem worked on a schedule, right? So it's like he shows up at 9 o'clock, he takes a lunch break at 1, and he leaves at 5, and he does this every day. So Akon shows up to Detroit, shows up to the studio at 6 o'clock. They're like, oh yeah, Em just left. He calls Em. He's like, hey man, you ready to, let's do this? You come back to the studio? He's like, yeah, I'll be there back there at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And Akon thought he was joking. He's like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. So they show up in the middle of his verse. 1 o'clock happens. He stops, goes, takes lunch, comes back 2 o'clock, picks up right back on it. Then he's halfway done with the song. 5 o'clock, he's like, all right, I'll see you tomorrow. And Akon's like, you're not going to finish it? He's like, no, I can do it tomorrow. And Akon was talking about, I was like, well, most musicians, they work in these little brief spurts, whatever the case is. He's like, his approach to the business was to treat it like a job and to show up every day. And there was actually a comment that I saved. I took a screenshot of the comment of this clip in the interview, because what I just described to you is going to be very similar to what Stephen King does. I was watching this interview to prep for this podcast with George R.R. Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones, right? And he's having a conversation with Stephen King. He's like, how do you write so many books? And Stephen King's is like, well, the first thing I do in the morning, I set aside, I'm uninterrupted for many hours at a time, and I write 6 pages a day. And I do that every day. And in 60 days, I have 360 pages, and that's another book. That's how you write that's how he's able to write 60 books. He treats it like a job. And it's not like, it's the consistency over intensity again. It's, it might take me 5-6 hours, whatever time it is, but I do it every day, 7 days a week. Then in the afternoon, he has a very set schedule. He's like writing in the morning, then he takes a nap. He has lunch, takes a nap. I think he answers letters, stuff like that in the afternoons, has dinner with his wife, spends time with his family, watches a baseball game, that kind of thing. That's Stephen King's schedule. But this quote that I saved, I think is a perfect illustration of what I'm trying to tell you. It says, this is the sign of a true professional. He doesn't sit in the studio waiting for inspiration to come. He goes to the studio rigidly, ready to work, knowing that it will be there for him when he calls on it. There's a very similar idea from what Stephen King is telling us right here, where he's like, listen, the act of writing poems, stories, essays has a lot more in common with sweeping the floor than you think it does. So him and his wife, they get married. They're still really young. This is Stephen King writing about being a father. And it just blew my mind. I did not know this before I read the book, like how much he struggled. They were living in a trailer. His wife was working at Dunkin' Donuts. He's cleaning maggots out of laundry. I'll get to it in a minute. They're trying to support 2 kids on no money. And so when he hits that break, like you feel it when you read this book. Like I had tears in my eyes when he finally hits with Carrie, because you know how the struggle and all the crap he went through. And I want to run over my future point, but it sticks out of my mind. They're renting a crappy little apartment for like $90 a month. And somebody buys the paperback rights to Carrie for $400,000. That is going to come from a guy that was so poor he couldn't even buy medicine for his sick daughter. This is crazy. This is him on being a father. When Tabby went into labor with my son, I was at a drive-in movie theater with a friend. We were on the third movie in the second six-pack when the guy in the office broke in with an announcement. This is when there were still pole speakers in those days. So if you ever seen old school drive-through theaters, you have this like portable speaker. Every car has its own speaker, so you can hear the movie, and it's like attached to your car. And so it says, the manager's announcement thus rang through the entire parking lot. Steve King, please go home. Your wife is in labor. Steve King, please go home. Your wife is going to have the baby. As I drove our old Plymouth towards the exit, a couple of hundred horns blared a salute. Many people flicked their headlights on and off, bathing me in a stuttery glow. When I got home, Tabby was calm and packed. She gave birth to Joe less than 3 hours later. He entered the world easily. For the next 5 years or so, nothing else about Joe was easy. But he was a treat. Both of them were really. They were a treat. And so anybody that has kids knows exactly what he's talking about. Yeah, it's really, really hard. It's the greatest thing that'll ever happen to you, though. So this is his wretched job just after college. This is what I just alluded to. I couldn't find a teaching job, so I went to work at New Franklin Laundry. So the laundry is like commercial laundry. So think of stuff coming from hospitals, stuff coming from restaurants, and he's in Maine, so everybody's eating seafood. By the time the tablecloths reached me, they stank to high heaven and were often boiling with maggots. The maggots would try to crawl up your arms as you loaded the washers. It was as if the little fuckers knew you were planning to cook them. The maggots were bad. The smell of decomposing clam and lobster meat was even worse. Hospital sheets and linens were worse. These also crawled with maggots in the summertime, but it was blood they were feeding on instead of lobster meat. So this is all about the struggle. All the highlights I'm going to give you for the next short while is all about the struggle. Broke, 2 kids, hoping on a dream, right? Just hoping I can live the dream I want. I want to be a writer. Can I support my family doing this? From a financial point of view, 2 kids were probably too much were probably too many for college grads working in a laundry and the second shift at Dunkin' Donuts. I wrote after work. I would sometimes write a little on my lunch break too. There were times when it occurred to me that I was simply repeating my mother's life. If I happened to be tired or if there were extra bills to pay and no money to pay them with, it seemed awful. I'd think, this isn't the way our lives are supposed to be going. The stories I sold to men magazines were just enough to create a rough, sliding margin between us and the welfare office. He's selling stories for, $100 here, $50 here, $75 here when he could, right? And then one day it just hits him. It's like, I can't even pay medication for my sick daughter. And he has a lucky break. A small lucky break here. And he talks about that. Trudging from the car to our apartment building was a low point. We both knew Naomi needed the pink stuff, which is what we called liquid amoxicillin. The pink stuff was expensive, and we were broke. She was so feverish, she glowed against my chest like a banked coal. When I saw there was an envelope sticking out of our mailbox, a rare Saturday delivery, I snagged it, praying it wouldn't turn out to be another bill. It wasn't. It was a check for a long story I hadn't believed would sell anywhere. The check was for $500, easily the largest sum I'd ever received. And so this goes on for many, many years. I'm going to still read to you. Really the note of this is the struggle and the belief and support of his wife. We were living in a trailer. I was driving a Buick with transmission problems we couldn't afford to fix. We had no telephone. We simply couldn't afford the monthly charge. I wasn't having much success with my own writing. Think about that, where he's at in his life. Put yourself in his shoes. In his mind, there's times in his mind it's telling him, give it up, Steve. Give it up. This isn't going to work. You can't be a writer. No one's buying your stuff. Give up. The bigger deal was that for the first time in my life, writing was hard. The problem was the teaching. So now he's doing laundry on the summer break, but he's teaching, I think, high school or something like that. By most Friday afternoons, I felt that I'd spent the week with jumper cables clamped to my brain. If I ever came close to despairing about my future as a writer, it was then. I could see myself 30 years on, wearing the same shabby tweed coats with patches on the elbows, potbelly rolling over my Gap khakis from too much beer. I'd have a cigarette cough from too many packs of cigarettes, thicker glasses, more dandruff, and in my desk drawer, 6 or 7 unfinished manuscripts, which I would take out and tinker with from time to time, usually when drunk. This is fantastic writing. And of course, I'd lie to myself, telling myself there was still time. It wasn't too late. My wife made a crucial difference during those years. Tabby never voiced a single doubt. Her support was a constant, one of the few good things I could take as a given. And whenever I see a first novel dedicated to a wife or a husband, I smile and I think, there's someone who knows. Writing is a lonely job. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of difference. They don't have to make speeches. Just believing is usually enough. This goes on for several years. He has the idea for Carrie. This is his first hit. Not only does the novel sell fantastically, but it's turned into a movie that also is very successful. This is before this happens. He writes it, the beginning of it, he hated it, and he threw it in the trash. His wife takes it out. The next night when I came home, Tabby had the pages. She spied them while emptying my wastebasket, had shaken the cigarette ashes off the crumpled balls of paper, smoothed them out, and sat down to read them. She wanted me to go on with it, she said. You've got something here, she said. I really think you do. And this is what Carrie taught him, and he's going to repeat this over and over again in the book. Variations of this same idea. The realization that stopping a piece of work just because it's hard, either emotionally or imaginatively, is a bad idea. Sometimes you have to go on when you don't feel like it. And sometimes you're doing good work when it feels like all you're managing is to shovel shit. He winds up writing the manuscript. He sends it off. And this is a much-needed break. This is the first one, okay? The manuscript of Carrie went off to Doubleday, that's a publisher, where I had made a friend named William Thompson. I pretty much forgot about it and moved on with my life. The intercom came on, and so he's still teaching at school. He's got like a free period, and he's just sitting in the teacher's lounge grading papers. He says the inter came on in the office and asked if I was there. I said I was, and she asked me to come to the office. I had a phone call. My wife, remember, they don't have a phone at home, okay? They're too poor to have a phone at home, so he's really worried. I hurried, my heart beating hard. Tabby would have had to dress the kids in their boots and jackets to use the neighbor's phone, and I could think of only two reasons why she might have done so. Either Joe or Naomi had broken a leg, or I had sold Carrie. My wife, sounding out of breath but deliriously happy, read me a telegram. Bill Thompson had sent it after trying to call and discovering that the Kings no longer had a phone. Congratulations, it read. Carrie, officially a Doubleday book. Is $2,500 advance okay? The future lies ahead. Love, Bill. So then they wind up celebrating. They have a little bit of champagne, maybe a cigarette, something like that. And then they just have a conversation. Like, his wife's kind of curious. Like, what does this mean? Like, could there be like a future in this? And so this is the note. And I wrote this note to myself after I read this section. And it's like, maybe, just maybe there's something here. A future different from our present. I'd read that Mario Puzo had just scored a huge advance for paperback rights to The Godfather. $400,000, according to the newspaper. But I didn't believe Carrie would fetch anywhere near that. Tabby asked if I thought the book would find a paperback publisher. I told her I thought the chances were pretty good, maybe 7 or 8 in 10. She asked how much it might bring. I said my best guess would be somewhere between $10,000 and $60,000. So he would get half that. That's the contract he has. So if it was 10, he'd get 5. If it was 60, he'd get 30. $60,000. She sounded almost shocked. Is that much even possible? I said it was. Not likely. Perhaps, but possible. Probably just pie in the sky, but it was a night for dreaming. And this is the part where it hits you, because at this point you've spent a few hours inside the mind of Stephen King, and you're reliving how much struggle that he had to get through, and how many times he was given the opportunity to quit, and he refused. So this is a phone call that's going to change his life. And it needed to come because not only is he doing really poorly financially, but his mom is dying of cancer at the same time. And he had just got off the phone with his brother earlier, and they were talking about, what do we do? Our mom is dying of cancer. Okay, so he says, one Sunday, not long after that call, I got another one from Bill Thompson. I was alone in the apartment. Are you sitting down? Bill asked. No, I said. Do I need to? You might, he said. The paperback rights to carry went to Signet Books for $400,000. I stood there in the doorway, casting the same shadow as always, but I couldn't talk. I hadn't heard him right. I couldn't have. The idea allowed me to find my voice again, at least. Did you say it went for $40,000? $400,000, he said. Under the rules of the road, meaning the contract I'd signed, $200K of it is yours. Congratulations, Steve. I was still standing in the doorway, looking across the living room toward our bedroom and the crib where Joe slept. Our place rented for $90 a month, and this man I'd met only once face-to-face was telling me that I'd won the lottery. The strength ran out of my legs. I didn't fall exactly, but I kind of whooshed down to a sitting position there in the doorway. Are you sure? I asked him. He said he was. I asked him to say the number again, very slowly and very clearly, so I could be sure I hadn't misunderstood. He said the number was a 4 followed by 5 zeros. We talked for another half hour, and I don't remember a single word of what we said. When the conversation was over, I tried to call Tabby at her mother's, but she had already left. I walked back and forth through the apartment, exploding with good news and without an ear to hear it. I was shaking all over. When she came home, I took her by the shoulders. I told her about the paperback sale. She didn't appear to understand. I told her again. Tabby looked over my shoulder at our shitty little apartment just as I had, and began to cry. That is the start of his writing career, the start of the success that he's going to build upon for the next few decades. He almost destroys it because he winds up becoming an alcoholic and a drug addict. And so this is what, great writing, this is what it's like being an alcoholic. Telling an alcoholic to control his drinking is like telling a guy suffering from the world's most cataclysmic case of diarrhea to control his shitting. My nights during the last 5 years of my drinking always ended with the same ritual. I'd pour any beers left in the refrigerator down the sink. If I didn't, they'd talk to me as I lay in bed until I got up and had another and another and one more. And he winds up doing cocaine, alcohol, Xanax, Valium, drugs I've never even heard of. They wound up having an intervention. He's sober now. But he says there's entire books. Like he wrote the book Cujo, which I was also turned into a movie. He's like, I don't remember writing that book. I was so drunk and high all the time. I don't remember any of this. And so at this point that he's writing the story he's about to tell us, he's sober. They wound up having an intervention. His family and everybody else was worried about him. And I think his wife and kids were threatening to leave. And so he wound up getting his act together. But this is just a fantastic story, and it's about putting work in its proper place. The last thing I want to tell you in this part is about my desk. For years, I dreamed of having the sort of massive oak slab that would dominate a room. No more child's desk in my trailer laundry closet. In 1981, I got the one I wanted and placed it in the middle of a spacious, skylighted study. For 6 years, I sat behind that desk, either drunk or wrecked out of my mind like a ship's captain in charge of a voyage to nowhere. A year or two after I sobered up, I got rid of that monstrosity and put in a living room suite where it had been. So this is in his office, right? In the early 90s, before they moved out onto their own lives, my kids sometimes came up in the evening to watch a basketball game or a movie and eat pizza. They usually left a box full of crusts behind when they moved on, but I didn't care. They came, they seemed to enjoy being with me, and I know I enjoyed being with them. I got another desk. It's handmade, beautiful, and half the size. I put it in the far west end of the office, in a corner under the eave. I'm sitting under that eave right now, a 53-year-old man with bad eyes, a gimp leg, and no hangover. I'm doing what I know how to do, and as well as I know how to do it. I came through all the stuff I told you about, and plenty more that I didn't, and now I'm going to tell you as much as I can about the job. As promised, it won't take long. It starts with this. Put your desk in the corner, and every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. And so the first, that's what he considers his CV, his mini memoir. Then he goes into like how he thinks about his craft. So there's more highlights there. But this is really about how to approach your work. And you're going to see like his intensity. I would say that he brings to it. It's like it's not going to run my life, but it's an important part of life, right? It's there to support life, but it isn't life. So this is Stephen King on how to approach your work. He's going to talk about writing, but this applies to so many other things, right? You can approach the act of writing with nervousness, excitement, hopefulness, or even despair. The sense that you can never completely put on the page what's in your mind and heart. You can come to the act with your fists clenched and your eyes narrowed, ready to kick ass and take down names. You can come to it because you want a girl to marry you or because you want to change the world. Come to it anyway, but lightly. Let me say it again. You must not come lightly to the blank page. I'm not asking you to come reverently or unquestioningly. I'm not asking you to be politically correct or cast aside your sense of humor. This isn't a popularity contest. It's not the Moral Olympics, and it's not church. But it's writing, damn it, not washing the car or putting on eyeliner. If you can take it seriously, we can do business. If you can't or won't, it's time for you to close the book and do something else. And so we see he's going to hold us to, just like Chemo held Derek Sivers to high expectations, right? Stephen King's going to say the same thing to us. What follows is everything I know about how to write good fiction. I'll be as brief as possible because your time is valuable and so is mine. And we both understand that the hours we spend talking about writing is time we don't spend actually doing it. I'll be as encouraging as possible because it's my nature and because I love the job. I want you to love it too. But if you don't want to work your ass off, you have no business trying to write well. So if you aren't willing to work hard, forget it, right? It's right that you should do all the work and burn all the midnight oil. There's stuff in there that can change your life. Believe me, I know. And so this idea that books are just made out of books, right? And he says that if you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others. Read a lot and write a lot. There's no way around these two things that I'm aware of. There's no shortcut. I'm a slow reader, but I usually get through 70 or 80 books a year, mostly fiction. I don't read in order to study the craft. I read because I like to read, yet there is a learning process going on. And so that's an echo of the idea that we covered a few podcasts back, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. Find work that feels like play to you but looks like work to others. And then this is another idea he points out that I've seen over and over again, that you can draw inspiration or you can know the right way to do something by seeing it done the wrong way. So it's like most writers can remember the first book he or she put down thinking, I can do better than this. Hell, I am going to do better than this. What could be more encouraging to the struggling writer than to realize that his or her work is unquestionably better than that of someone who actually got paid for his or her stuff? And this is where he goes back to, unquestionably holding us to high standards. And his whole point here is like most people are full of excuses, which we just saw in that story. Chemo offers his services for free just to help out to a ton of people. Yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. They never show up, right? This is just what most humans quit. Most humans can't stick to anything. Most humans are full of excuses. And so Stephen's going to draw the line in the sand here. It's like, you better make sure that you're actually going to do this stuff. Why are you reading this book if you're not going to act on it, right? Can I be blunt on this subject? If you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. It's simple as that. And that was in response to people saying, yeah, I want to be a writer, but I don't have time to read. They actually say, and he's had people say this to his face. Imagine getting that close to Stephen King, and you should be embarrassed. I'd be embarrassed to say something like that, assuming that, this is a writer that you admire. You worked yourself in a position, maybe you went to one of his book signings, whatever case, and it's like, yeah, I want to do what you do, but, I don't have time. I mean, come on, man. He's going to talk about, and he's going to expound on this idea. Because really, if it's important to you, you make time for it, right? Actions, one of my favorite sayings I talk about all the time and chastise myself with is actions express priority. Like if I'm saying something's important to me, then I analyze what's coming out of my mouth, what I'm actually saying is important, and then I compare how I'm spending my time. How I spend my time is actually what's important to me, not the lies I tell myself, right? It's very easy to lie to yourself. Yeah, I want to be a writer. I want to be this. I want to be this. I want to be the best at this. I want to do whatever the case is. Okay, well, how did you spend your day yesterday? Take an inventory of your time. Those are the things you actually want to do. Actions express your priority. So he's talking about one of his sons, his young son Owen, wanted to play the saxophone, and he starts out, practicing his own time, and then slowly, before he tells his dad he wants to quit, his dad already knew he wanted to quit. And he says, I knew not because Owen stopped practicing, but because he was practicing only during the periods that his music teacher had set for him. As soon as his practice time was over, it was back into the case, and there it stayed until the next lesson or practice time. What this suggested to me was that when it came to the sax and my son, there was never going to be any real playtime. It was all going to be rehearsal. That's no good. If there's no joy in it, it's just no good. It's best to go on to some other area where the deposits of talent may be richer and the fun quotient higher. And so Stephen King's approach to writing and reading is the same approach that Kobe Bryant had to basketball, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Talent renders the whole idea of rehearsal meaningless. When you find something in which you are talented, you do it, whatever it is, until your fingers bleed or your eyes are ready to fall out of your head. That sort of strenuous reading and writing program I advocate, 4 to 6 hours a day, every day, will not seem strenuous if you really enjoy doing these things and have an aptitude for them. That's another way to say find work that looks like play to you but looks like work to other people, right? And so Kobe talks about this. It's like, listen, if I have to convince you to get into the gym, like, you need to find another profession. I wake up excited to go train. I wake up excited to go practice. I wake up excited to go play the game. And so his point, and he was giving a speech to an audience before, is like, if you ever find yourself in a profession where you have to like pull yourself to do things, or you're just dreading it, go find another profession. Stephen King is saying the same thing here. You're telling me you want to be a writer. You don't want to write just as much as my son doesn't want to play saxophone. That sort of strenuous reading and writing program I advocate, 4 to 6 hours a day, every day, will not seem strenuous if you really enjoy doing these things and you have an aptitude for them. And a few pages later, he describes this idea as succinctly as possible. For me, not working is the real work. Then he talks about, just because I like doing it doesn't mean it comes easily to me. He gives us advice, like, if you're stuck, take a break, go get bored. This is exactly what David Ogilvy used to say. He's just like, I have long periods. The guy spent all his time working, reading, and writing. That was his job, right? And he talks about, when I'm stuck, I have long periods where I do nothing. I go ride a bike, I listen to music, I go for walks, I don't work. And then I get this flood of from my subconscious that actually helps me solve the problem I'm stuck on. So he says, boredom can be a very good thing for someone in a creative jam. For weeks, I got exactly nowhere in my thinking. It all seemed too hard, too fucking complex. I had run out of too many plot lines, and they were in danger of becoming snarled. I circled the problem again and again, beat my fists on it, knocking my head against it, and then one day, when I was thinking of nothing, the answer came to me. And that's another benefit, I think, of writing the book. Yeah, the second half of the book, it's all about, his approach to his own craft, but you also see that, he's a human just like you and I. He's constantly running into dead ends. He's not sure of himself. He's making mistakes over and over again. It's like the way you feel, like, that's normal. Everybody feels that way. You're doing something difficult. It's not going to be easy. He's got another good idea on this page. Talks about, why are you doing what you're doing? Do you actually know why? Like, maybe you started doing something, you let the momentum carry you forward. Like, take a break and, like, why am I doing this? It's really important. It's what we, like, humans need to know why. I've never hesitated to ask myself, either before starting the second draft of a book or while stuck for an idea in the first draft, just what it is I'm writing about. Why am I spending the time doing this when I could be playing my guitar or riding my motorcycle? What got my nose down to the grindstone in the first place and then kept it there? The answer doesn't always come right away, but there usually is one, and it's usually not too hard to find either. And then he gives advice, like, you are unique in the sense that only you have had your unique set of experiences, the way those experiences are intertwined with the way your mind works, what your personality is, your natural interests are. He's like, you need to imbibe your work with who you are. That makes it more unique. We see this, like, many companies take on the personality of their founders, right? It's just like an expansion of I think it was in the book Inside Steve Jobs' Brain. They're like, Apple's just 10,000 versions of Steve Jobs. I forgot the exact sentence, but it's that same idea. It's like just an extension of who you are. So don't shy away from that. Inject more of your weird personality into it. It makes you unique. It differentiates yourself, right? You undoubtedly have your own thoughts, interests, and concerns, and they have arisen, as mine have, from your experiences and adventure as a human being. You should use them in your work. That's not all those ideas that are there for, perhaps, but surely it's one of the things that they're good for. And then he's got a great description of how difficult, anytime you're doing, he's talking about being a writer, being a lonely job. Anytime you're doing something difficult, it's to some degree lonely, you have to be a little off to want to do this. Like, why don't you just go get a normal job? Like, you're kind of crazy to want to do something different. All the people that we study, all the people that listen to this, they're a little bit crazy in a good way. But he says, writing can be difficult. Writing can be a difficult, lonely job. It's like crossing the Atlantic Ocean in a bathtub. There's plenty of opportunity for self-doubt. And one of the great things about me reading the words and having a meeting of the mind with Stephen King, right, is the fact that he talks about this. I know I'm off. I know I'm crazy to do this, but I have to be this way. It's very inspiring and refreshing to read somebody else's inner monologue, and the things that they might not discuss with other people, they write down in books, and you're able to get inside their mind and realize, okay, this guy knows he chose a difficult path in life and he did it so on purpose. You learn best by reading a lot and writing a lot, and the most valuable lessons of all are the ones you teach yourself. These lessons almost always occur when the study door is closed. Another variation of the idea I think he was trying to express in that paragraph is that formidable people are built in solitude. You're going to go out into the world and you're going to share with the world your creations and everything else, but you need some alone time with just you. And his son talks about that later on, that because Stephen King's wife's a writer too, and that they would spend 5-6 hours a day by themselves in their respective offices. Then he talks more about the struggle. He talks about even writing this book. Remember, by the time he wrote this book, he wrote it from 97 to 2000, because he gets hit by a van and almost killed when he's in 1999. He's in the middle of writing this book when that happens. He actually talks about it. But he's still, he could have retired then, right, before he wrote this book, and went down as one of the most successful fiction writers of all time. And he's talking about, I'm still struggling. I almost quit this book. Although it usually takes me only 3 months to finish the first draft of a book, this one was still only half completed 18 months later. That was because I put it aside. I was not sure how to continue, or if I should continue at all. Writing fiction was almost as much fun as it had ever been, but every word of this nonfiction book was a kind of torture. And then just one sentence that I think is fantastic. The scariest moment is always just before you start. And before I tell you a closing thought from Stephen King, I want to talk about this idea. There's like a bunch of like postscripts and epilogues in the book, and there was an essay written by one of his sons that I think is a great idea. And so he says, my father gave me my first job reading audiobooks. He would pay me $9 per finished 60-minute tape. So $9 per hour completed audio, right? So what he would do, this is a fantastic idea. I think I'm going to use this as well. Not only does it help teach your kid about money, but also gets them to read more. So he would hire his son, and then he also did this for his other kids as well. Give them a book, could be one of your favorite books, whatever the case is. Have them, set them up so they can record it, right? Just have them to read the book to you. So at the end, right, you have a book on tape of your kid's voice. So you have that forever. Your kid's not, maybe sounds one way when he's 10. He's not going to sound that way when he's an adult, but you still have that recording. You can listen to it other times, because Stephen King was one of the first authors to embrace audiobooks. He was really early. This was back in I think he said 87 when he realized, oh, this is a good idea. But I just love this idea. It's like your kid gets to read. He makes something. He gets paid for what he made, because he's realizing, hey, if I provide value to other people, people will pay me for that, right? And then you as a parent get like a little time capsule from your son or daughter's childhood. That's a really good idea. I just wanted to share that with you. And so here's a closing thought from Stephen King. Writing isn't about making money, getting famous, getting dates, getting laid, or making friends. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy. Some of this book, perhaps too much, has been about how I learned to do it. Much of it has been about how you can do it better. The rest of it, and perhaps the best of it, is a permission slip. You can. You should. And if you're brave enough to start, you will. That is where I'll leave it. I can't recommend this book highly enough. I absolutely loved it. I told you I couldn't put it down. I was irresponsible how many other things I neglected in my life to finish this book. So if you want to buy the book, You want the full story, buy the book using the link that's in the show notes. You'll be supporting the podcast at the same time. The very, very best way you can support the podcast and a friend is if you want to support the podcast and a friend at the same time, I should say, buy them a gift subscription to Founders. There's a link in the show notes to do so. That is 210 books down, 1,000 to go. I'll talk to you again soon.